I would first love to introduce to us our esteemed guest today, Ravi Lockman. Him and I met at App Dynamics, and he comes from an engineering background. He's worked across the entire gamut of the developer lifecycle, including evangelism. Today, he's actually running a product strategy team. He manages, I think, a team of 10 product managers over at harness.io.
Different titles, but yeah,
CI/CD.
okay. Team of 9, but yeah.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, welcome, Robbie.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me here. A long time buddy of mine. Excited to be talking about our QA developer or QA verse developer or QA and developer, depending how what side of the equation you're on. And yeah, really excited to keep it interactive and just learning from everybody here and helping provide perspective where I can.
Today's topic is the merging of dev and QA. And I consider it a pretty provocative statement. You hear a lot of this like shift left movement, and there's a lot of tools and technologies that are changing the developer stack as we know it. That's also a bit of a catalyst for that shift. And so Robbie and I were shooting the breeze a few months ago, and I was like, Robbie, like, why don't we just get onto a workshop and just have a meeting of the minds where I get to pick your brain, ask you about what your thoughts are on all this. Anyway, that's the genesis behind this chat here. So without further ado, I'm going to ask you a question, Robbie,
Sure.
and I think that this is probably a really good starting point for this topic. The question I want to ask you is, I think on everyone's mind right now is, okay, shift left, the merging of dev and QA. Give us like I don't know, 1 minute or 5 minute introduction and everything that you think has happened in the last 5 or 10 years that's
Yeah.
causing us to make this argument.
Yeah. I think you used to have a lot of separation of duties for certain reasons. Hey, different skill sets require like different ways of thinking about something. So, I'll talk about an obvious one and then not, a not so obvious one. So this might be like a 3 minute, meet you in the middle of 3 minute explanation. If you take a look at, if we take a look at a macro view, like DevOps, right? Developers and operations, it's typically those two sides of the house are different. Like developers will focus on innovation and change, and then the operations side focuses on stability or keeping the lights on. And they would be pitted against each other. Okay, if I have a change, that's a risk, right? Okay, if we something might go wrong if we deploy something. And so we don't want, Mr. or Mrs. Developer to make as many changes versus Mr. or Mrs. Developer, like their whole purpose is to iterate. And so that's kind of like the natural progression that we because of the opportunity to reconcile those differences and okay, for the common good, DevOps came about. But if we take a look at the nuance of okay, let's take a little further look at software development or software delivery. Is okay. There's multiple sides to that. It's not one size fits all. Software is pretty complicated, right? Like being a software engineer, you gain skills in two ways. You gain skills in domain, right? So, hey, you might be working for an insurance company or one of my favorite examples is like wineforpets.com. Like you'd be working for a alcohol distributor for your cat. Now, each one of those are two
Is that
different,
legal?
maybe California. Yeah, it's pretty cool there. So
Is
like
there an age limit?
7 in dog years, it's 49. But yeah, it's you have a domain, you gain domain expertise and you gain technical expertise, right? Those are the kind of two things that you build throughout your career. And so, like either or, it's challenging, right? Like the insurance or financial domain is pretty challenging. Even how alcohol delivery for your pets, a lot of laws to go through, and getting like a common domain knowledge is challenging. And so, who best, like always on if you're focusing on the developer side, like who best will understand the domain than a developer because he or she is writing the literal functions to make that domain become automated or that domain to become more of a differentiator in a feature. And so if he or she writes the feature, he or she should know a lot more. They should also know.
Can I ask you a question? When you
Yeah.
say domain knowledge, are you talking about subject matter expertise? If you're working for NASDAQ, like you
Yeah.
should know how the stock market works.
Yeah. Like maybe if you took a look at a job description by NYSE or something, they'll be like, oh, let's say, you know what, you want to become like a derivatives engineer, right? Or like a futures engineer, like some sort of like financial product. Like, most of the stuff is written in Java, right? You'd be like, "Oh, like, the first requirement might be, like, Java or Go or, like, or Rust or, like, some other programming language," but, like, the very second requirement be like, "You are familiar with this domain." Huh? Like, I know Java. Like, I've been in situations like that, like, in my previous parts of the career as a software engineer, the domain kept changing. I'm like, "Oh, like, I don't know how to put an aircraft together. It's not my job, but we'll try." One of my customers I work for.
Can I share two anecdotes that I think might one will support this and one will challenge this?
Sure.
And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I wrote code for this startup many years ago that would run financial analysis on commodity trading advisors. These like commodity funds are like a dime a dozen. They pop up everywhere and they say, "Hey, come invest your money and invest it in all these different futures." And these funds all have these like time series data that they release, and then you run financial analysis on that. So me being like a very young, my early 20s software engineer, I didn't have a background in the financial analysis, how to calculate annual rate of return and LTV and all these different
No.
financial, not LTV, but like different financial, the math behind calculating and back then, by the way, there weren't like open source libraries, feed a time series and then runs the method called, and you're good to go. Now, the second example I want to give you, Ravi, is that so that first story does corroborate, I think, your argument. But the second story is the larger the organization, I think that the more the pressure is on the product manager
Yeah.
than the software engineer
I was gonna say
to
that.
have domain knowledge. Because you can't really expect software engineers to be like an expert on stock trading or in that case, financial concepts. So product owner, their responsibility is to have domain knowledge. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think as a product manager now, like, well, I see both sides of the argument, right? Having built software like this before, and just either like restrictive environments or highly regulated environments, or like things that require a lot of domain knowledge, it's a push or pull, right? And this is where like testing comes in, like very quickly, right? It's like there's an expectation of everybody can have like similar skills. Like the product manager will miss implementation details. Like I do it, I admit, like I might make a wide range statement saying, "Hey, we need a user to do this." And this is what good looks like. And then there's some nitty gritty underneath that. Oh, we need to comply with this is comply with some sort of regulation here. And then it's like, okay, what's the regulation? Like hand wavy stuff. And we have implemented that in other parts of the product. But like really the big gap there is domain knowledge. Like we all like even as a seasoned PM, like you still have gaps in domain knowledge. And so it requires like kind of a consensus of people to like find that out. Now that can be the software engineer doing his or own research on, hey, this is like right or wrong, because they might have been in the field for a while. Now this is also where like QE comes in, like quality engineering, saying, okay, it's more than just testing. If 2 + 2 = 4, like we need to make sure like there's like non-functional requirements like NFRs that we have to meet also. And so it's the domain, like the more people who have domain knowledge, the better. But that's not always the case, right? As the more vertical you go in industry, like less and less people will have that expertise. And so, like, at some point, it's like, how do you disseminate the expertise? And this is where shifting left comes in, right? So now the long tail of the answer. You're like, okay, like 8 minutes in, right? It's like part of this whole shift left mentality. It's just that. It's like it's either fairly or unfairly burdening like the engineer with certain tasks. Now, shift left taking domain knowledge out is like different types of domain, like maybe security, right? Saying, hey, you know what? If you make more hygienic choices, you would make better choices based on the data you're given. A little bit separate from, hey, if we're building like a derivatives product, like we're like letting you choose the trading algorithm, not to that extent, right? But it's just like, hey, like going back to these NFRs, hey, like the more information you have as you're building something, and a better decision you can make. And also you can start enforcing certain policies into that saying, hey, this security is a very easy example to I'll just grasp from that for now. Hey, you know what? You picked a particular part of open source that had a CVE or CVSS score of 9. Pick something else. Pick something with like less than 6. Like that, then that's a design time decision that the engineer can make. And
Sorry,
but that's
what was that score?
oh, there's like CVE, like a common something vulnerability and exposure. And then, like, CVSS is a scoring I forget what the common vulnerability I forget what the SS part, it's like score something, scoring system? That sounds right. Yeah, scoring system and
It's a way
advanced
to score open source projects on their security ability.
yeah, vulnerabilities. If you ever, like, updated, like, your iPhone, you click on, like, the security thing, it'll be like, "These are, like, 9 CVEs that this update addresses." It's, like, it's from NIST and MITRE, what a CVE is. So it's like a common reporting mechanism saying if there's just some sort of security vulnerability, like, how do we commonly disseminate that? Different pieces of open source will have any piece of software, right? Will have someone reports a vulnerability that get uploaded to like NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology, and like they will say, hey, you know what? This package has this vulnerability. If you're building something net new, like shifting left, you're like, oh, like I can pick between two versions of a particular piece of open source. Why do I pick one that's less secure than one is that's more secure? Like it's just like less rework that you have to do. So that's where I know I split like the domain knowledge with like shift left education there, but that's where the two paths come together.
Okay, so that makes sense to me. All right, a lot of trends that happened in the last 10 years. Um, it's a pretty provocative statement to say that dev and QA is merging. So I want to bring the topic back towards this, or at least the talk track back towards this
Yeah.
topic. So taking that into consideration, kind of the same question, but what has happened in the last, let's say, 5 years
Yeah.
that is either supporting this trend, in your opinion? And this could be trends, or it could be like methodologies. I think
Yeah.
I'm more interested in, but probably tools and technologies or advancements in like the development stack, where it would support the argument to say that yes, because of this, developers and QA are going to merge. And also, I have a second question, but let's answer this one first.
Yeah, I think like 10-second back, like how things used to be, and it's like very rarely like this, like anymore. Like there used to be separate, like totally separate organizations. Oh, like the developer will write, it's all waterfall, then we'll test, and then we'll test again, and then we'll fix, then we'll deploy. Like those are like very long development cycles. Given today, like most people will be like in some sort of like scaled agile, like small team type of delivery. If you subscribe to Spotify's like tribe and guild, and I forget which other like wizardry reference they have of their model, how the team structure, like small team model is, you have to do more with less resources, right? But you're also delivering smaller changes over and over. And so if you look at that, there's a lot of like popular things like behavior driven development, BDD, or test driven development, like TDD, that a lot of the quality is being like thought of immediately as you're writing the software, right? You're not like waiting, oh, let me write a feature and wait 6 weeks for someone to come test it. I used to do that and try to trick the tester. Like I admit it, I would try to like make it hard for the tester to test. I don't want to redo anything. Good luck trying to figure out what I did wrong. If I did anything wrong, well, clearly I did. It's like the software's iterative, but
Can
um,
can I just pause really quick? You made a very interesting statement. You were trying to make it more difficult for the tester to test your code. Is that not, and they, so, and this could be my misunderstanding of that process, but wouldn't that result in bad code? If your code is untestable, that's reflective of the developer's bad code, right?
it's not so like, this is going back to like how things used to be. The
Hmm.
tester will never test my code. They'll be testing the deployment of what my code is running. They're not looking at my like lines of code. Like, no way. The tester like this shows how advanced like quality engineering has come to today, right?
Oh, so we're talking about more like end-to-end testing or
Yeah, yeah. There's
integration
like
testing. Not unit testing literally is looking at your code and then writing unit tests against
yeah,
it,
but
functional tests.
that's more like how things are done today. Like testing isn't being ingrained like a lot sooner in the SDLC, right? So let's say like a good one is like pair programming, right? So if you take a look at what pair programming is, it's not two people writing the same thing. It's usually someone like is writing the feature and someone is testing the feature, right? In pair programming, usually the more senior person in pair programming is the person testing the software. Like they're always a more senior engineer. Right? So let's say I see Vikas on here. Say Vikas and I were writing a piece of software. Like I might be writing like the function, and Vikas will look over my shoulder, like a couple take seats over and be like, okay, yeah, be in charge of ensuring quality. Is Ravi writing to spec? How can we validate that he's writing to spec? Are we automating as much as we can? Like really as a science of quality, right? So it's like more so like common like 15 years ago, like it was maybe a unfair statement that folks who were in quality engineering were valued less than people who were the developers, right? It was like a lower job. I would never do QA, only development for me. Versus now, like the more senior engineers, like actually the quality engineers, like they also have to understand how to put together, understand optimizations, and also understand like how to validate what's being written. And so that's what's kind of come to be like a whole host of technologies support that, right? Like from how software's become more iterative, right? So from packaging to deployment to even languages or there's like infinite number of test suites out there. Like for there's language specific test suites, there's function specific test suites. There's you can test even more. Like there's infrastructure. Like, as more applications are, like, infrastructure aware, right? Like, you need to test, like, all parts of the stack, and that's pretty challenging, right? Because
So,
good.
sorry, I want to jump in before
Yeah.
you move too far away from this point that you just made. So, what you're saying is that historically QA was not as senior of a role. Maybe there's some coding. Obviously, there has to be some coding knowledge if you're running unit tests, but they're
Yeah.
not as senior of programmers. Today, on the other hand, it's the more senior programmer who's probably writing the test, especially in like peer programming. Is
Yeah.
that because QA has become more valuable or more of a necessity, or because QA has gotten really hard and so you need a more senior person to do it, or
I
both?
think it's I think it's a little bit of both, right? What at least I can talk specifically what we do at Harness specifically, and so we have a it's similar to a tribe and guild model. We have a council model that, like, for the Scrum teams, there's it's like a software engineer. Like, you're not like modern software engineering teams are people aren't here for 30 years, right? They rotate around teams like, hey, we need to develop this feature or this set of features, and so like we're going to put a small team together for 8 weeks, 12 weeks, a couple months, and have them, like, just dedicate, like, scrum time on a particular feature. But with that has to come quality, right? Okay, they usually at that point, the quality engineers are advisors at that point, right? Like specialized engineering, like an application, like an AppSec engineer is an advisor. There's not one AppSec engineer in every dev team, or even more so because the quality resources are harder to get. But their purview is like more like they're focused on like overall quality, automation of the quality. Like you, not only do you have to understand like the application, you have to understand like how to validate it. And so quality can be performance, quality can be robustness, quality can be the one-on-one level. Did it match the feature max expectation? Right? That's like given, but like the QE roles certainly has expanded. I mean, you do look like a software engineer. Like you have to iterate. Like your tests have to get updated. How you deliver the tester can be performance impacting, coverage. Like these are all like architectural decisions that have to be made. And that's why, in my experience, the more senior engineer is actually the quality engineer on a feature delivery team.
Do you still see the testing pyramid as the old classic Martin Fowler, like unit testing at the bottom, integration, and then end to end? Or are there new and additional layers? Obviously, there's more types of testing, but generally speaking, does that testing pyramid still stand as a paradigm today?
I think so. It's like the lines blur a lot because it's like you it just mimics the SDLC, like, when you're let's just focus on something, let's say we're writing a calculator, right? So we're like calculator.com, and we're adding the division feature. We got addition and subtraction done. First will be, as you're building something, you wanna validate that the division feature works. You can't divide by 0. There's all these rules, right? Like, you can't
Hmm.
what happens if you divide by a negative number? All this, like, math will come back to you. And those are, like, functional tests, right? But then, hey, we're part of calculator.com. We service 1 billion calculations a day. So there's as your application becomes more reliant on the infrastructure, then it's like integration tests. Okay, this is part of the overall calculator. There's like system tests. Oh, can we handle 5,000 concurrent users dividing at the same time? And so like that pyramid, it follows you around, but like you're always optimizing like the what this whole shift left mentality was like, hey, as an engineer, like I'm gonna blur the QA and dev engineer, like you might be only focused on the functional test. But today, because this whole, one of your favorite words, a T-shaped developer or a full lifecycle developer, they're in charge of the entire lifecycle, right? They're in charge of function to deploy to operations. And so this pyramid, like people are in charge of the entire pyramid now, right? What if I were delivering a piece of software? I had to take performance into account, right? I need to do perf testing. I need to do conformance testing. I have to do all things that were platform engineer centric or cloud architect centric that as a developer, like it's shifted to you. And but again, like those things are like a lot of very challenging to suss out. So this is why like a quality engineer who would like take over that stuff is the more senior engineer. So I know it came full circle there saying that the pyramid is still there, but who writes the pyramid? Like it's usually only one person now. It's not like 5 people write different parts of the pyramid.
Okay. You made a very interesting point, and now what's going through my mind is that how sustainable is that? Are you going to be able to even get coverage if you're putting all that responsibility on the actual programmer? And if you do get coverage, what the hell happens to your velocity?
You take a hit. One person can't do everything, right? Like you'll take a hit. In if you look at a well-run organization, like I'll just use Spotify as a model, right? Like, they're very, like, public and, like, how they go about their software like, how they go about software engineering. They have a very strong, like, platform engineering, like, center of excellence, right? Saying, "Hey, we have this, like, list of tools that help you deploy. We have these are the frameworks that you can use. These are your monitoring stack. This is your like, our logging stack. This is, like, authentication stack that you can use." And so they give you a lot of the components, and, like, with those components, like, a lot of things are pre-built. "Hey, you know what? We have if you use our authentication stack, we guarantee you the service will be available, and, like, we have a mock of the service. We test the service ourselves." So there's, like, centralization of common features that are happening, but those all come with predefined, like, quality that's going on or predefined SLAs that you expect. The other part of it is if you're building something, or let's say you were in charge of the authentication service now, right? Like, you are now the producer of these central components that are out there, then yeah, it's a big burden, but software is and this is, like, more intrinsic of an answer, like, software is it's a culmination of thousands of decisions over time, right? And, like, inherent quality, like, builds upon quality, and so a lot of people aren't boiling the ocean at once. There's not, like, a big bang change with Scrum or SCAF, right? Like, you have to go to waterfall for some huge inceptional type of change, and so this is more of a soapbox answer. It's just that yeah, it's difficult. I agree. Like, even every day I agree more and more, like, the more senior engineers, like, the quality engineer, because they're responsible for so much. And even today, like, they might be put on single person, right? Hey, as a developer, here's how our code coverage looks. Here's how our test suite looks. Like, you're adding a feature, make sure you conform to all of these. And that's what happens today, right? Go ahead.
Do you, or I'm gonna give you an analogy, and I'm curious to know if you agree with this or not. The DevOps movement came about. Well, we obviously know what the reasons why it came about, but as a consequence of DevOps, what ended up happening is the developers started to take over more operations roles. And so before that, it was IT operations, which were more like system administrators than they were software engineers. They didn't really understand the application very well. They knew how to deploy servers and optimize the machine, but they didn't really know the nuances of the application and how best to deploy and keep it running, which the software developer did and
Yeah.
should. And so, because of that conflict, DevOps essentially forced the software developer to move almost, it was more of a shift right, or I guess you could say the operations responsibilities shifted left towards the developer. Is this a similar trend where the QA engineer, okay, sorry, before I ask that question, IT operations either had to learn how to code or get out, right? So like they were extinct. If they learned how to code and build automations, then they evolved into DevOps engineers or SREs today. Is this a similar situation? So now this is my question. Is this a similar situation where the, is it the developer is taking over QA, or is it that the QA engineer is now building production code and both roles are just merging in the middle, or
Yeah,
both?
I think it's like what's overall just like it's just like a not a critique or just an observation of like engineering in general. Like the lines are blurring, right? It's the total ownership is winning because for better or for worse, right? Like total ownership is hey, like instead of saying developer QA, I'm saying engineer at this point. Like engineer is responsible for a number of features in production. So from the inception to influencing design to ensuring quality to ensuring like operate running it, everything has become software, right? Like just going like there's nothing that's not software defined anymore. So now the people who are racking and stacking the servers, that's your cloud provider, and that's Google, Microsoft, Amazon. Pretty much like anything you deploy or anything that you like execute, there's just using Terraform, using CloudFormation, you're being some sort of declarative system like Kubernetes, like even in Kubernetes, like the networking stack, storage stack, the CSI, CNI, like that's all code, right? And it's designed for iteration. So because it's designed for iteration, like everybody tends to become more software engineering because in our role in software engineering, iteration is paramount. Nothing's ever done without iteration. Like no one, if you watch me
It's
write,
evolution. It's natural.
if you watch me like write code, you think I'm stupid because like it's just trial and error. That's as a seasoned engineer, like I admit it. Like we build things with trial and error, right? That's we keep, and that error is where quality comes in. No, it's very rarely is there unless we're like just like at very beginning of building something like and something just doesn't start, like, usually, like, those errors are hard to find because there's not a smoking this goes into a smoking gun theory. There's usually not a smoking gun when there's an incident, right? If there was, like, it would be immediately corrected, and it wouldn't take very many people. "Oh, this app failed to start." Cool. We didn't deploy it. So it failed to start in one environment. It never made it past the first environment, like, easy peasy, like, today. Like, that will never get passed anywhere. But if you look at, like, incidents, they're very complicated. "Oh, you know what? Over a course of 8 hours, there was, like, a thundering herd problem." This just gets into site reliability engineering. There's some servers got overrun because software is very complex. It's not one person writes it. It's dozens of services or not hundreds of services and distributed infrastructure that's out there. And this is where, hey, like the science of quality comes in. Like, how can we test for this? How can we? And this is like there's some sub areas like site reliability engineering. There's an argument to be like, hey, their quality also, right? They're in charge of uptime. That's a quality metric, right? And as these things become more complicated, it's just hey, like trying to empower more people to be agents of change and agents of quality is, I think, it's what's happening. In practice, in reality, it's incredibly hard. Like these skills are like very vertical at some point. I'm not an okay, maybe not a good example. I'm pretty okay at monitoring, but I'm not an expert on networking. Like my biggest outage was a networking related outage at one point. Misconfigured decider. I don't know what that is. I do now. At the time, I didn't know what one is. And yeah, like as the amount of skills is required to get something somewhere else, quality, like at the end of the day, like quality is super critical, right? Like who does a check? So that's the open
So
ended
I think
question.
you hit the nail on the head, and I think you answered my question. So going back to the DevOps analogy, pre-DevOps, it was like engineer writes code, throws it over the fence, and then operations writes the ops deploys it.
No.
In this analogy, it's like engineer writes code, throws it over the fence, and then QA would have to write a test against it. So it's very similar. There's a brick wall right in between, and you throw it over the fence. Whereas what you're saying is that no, in today's world, the developer is responsible for performance, for security, and maybe not 100% responsible, but at least collaborative or partnership with the teams that do focus on that. So that it's not something you just throw over the fence, but it's something that is a first class consideration when you're writing the feature, security and performance and uptime. And by that logic, by that metaphor, QA is the same. So the software engineer is saying, all right, hey, you, Mr. Mrs. Engineer, you are also responsible for QA. Is that a fair analogy?
Yeah,
Did I
I think
sum that up?
it's fairly fair what's happening in the industry. It's there's like a positive light and a negative light. Positive light is like total ownership. Hey, like at any point, like every like the team because the teams are getting smaller, right? Like small teams, like the expertise that they have to have is there's an advisor relationship with a matrix, a different type of team, and there's like an execution relationship with the core members of the team. Versus is like also just trying to get more out of less. Okay. Because hey, again, like smaller the team, the quicker they can deliver. It's all I forget what the organizational uh design or just a philosophy behind it is like points of communication. Like if there's like, 3 people on a team, there's like 9 possible ways of communication. There's 8 factorial ways of communication. Or something the math really increases. So like at A, it's just like human design or human centric design that the smaller amount of people can be more efficient making a change. And that's where it's all coming. Like it's just not a conspiracy theory, but it's just, okay, we if Amit and I had to build something, like, we and I could probably build something quicker than the several people, like, not saying anything bad, but the several people on here, but, like, we have more decision points to make if there's, like, more people involved, and it's just natural progression of things.
So back when this trend was starting, I'm going to take a little bit of a detour real quick from the conversation. I was in my early days at App Dynamics, back in the early teens, I was observing this trend where people were breaking out into at least the application monoliths were going from single code bases to like microservices. This is actually before the word microservice even existed, but it was more SOA back then. But then microservice was introduced to the industry. And so I started calling it ISO machines. And I pasted a link that I eventually wrote a blog about, which I want to say I published this when I was at Harness at one point. For those of you who don't know, Robbie and I were colleagues at Harness. Anyway, Isomer is an acronym for independent teams that are service oriented. Each team has a product owner. They have performance metrics as their North Star. It has a dedicated engineering team. So not like one engineer isn't responsible for 5 different services. Like you have a dedicated engineering team to that service, but it has its own release economy. And so anyway, if you're interested and curious, I also did a talk on this exact topic at BlueCon in Denver 2015 or 2016 when I first introduced like the idea, but it, it eventually got replaced by what Jeff Bezos called the pizza team. And so Isomer didn't really catch the industry. But anyway, I thought I'd share that.
I
I
think
thought it was creative because the word isomer also in chemistry, isomers are, I'm going to totally butcher this, but they're like some sort of chain or something like that. And I thought it was like a perfect acronym for describing modern day dev teams.
more interesting, like just quick point of view is like changes are getting smaller and smaller. And so because going back to, okay, two people can do like they're a little bit quicker than like several people, is that if you're making a smaller change, there's more time for you to build quality into that. It's a if we take a look at like how computing has went from like physical machines and the monolith to virtual machines and the microservice, and then those workloads have been containerized. And now we're going into serverless and even post serverless with like constructs, like little itty bitty functions. Like it's the unit of what is we're deploying that is changing is getting smaller and smaller. But then also we can focus on all the other things. If we're introducing a small like construct or a serverless function, and because we can deploy so quickly, we can also test it very quickly too. Okay, you're only deploying like a I hate using lines of code as an example. Hey, but you're deploying in a very atomic way, like a 9 line of code function. Like you can take some of the time to like back that up with testing, right? And just execute the suite against it. And so the smaller the changes, quality will should be able to come with it because you can focus more on other stuff versus, oh, I need to release like this massive waterfall feature. Like it took all 10 of us on the webinar 6 months to develop, and so then you would be like, "Ah, where do we start?" Like, it's we haven't out of sight, out of mind. Like, where do we start? Versus it's very, like, insight in mind when you're making a smaller change. Again, that's just more psychology, in my guess in psychology, but smaller change, yeah, able to do a little bit more poly-wise.
Okay. So the last time we were chatting about this, we were brainstorming and you were sharing with me some really interesting products. And I think everyone's probably excited about this. What are some of the really cool things that you're seeing right now? Like, what's the 2024 buzzword or buzzwords?
Oh, yeah, like, the buzzword, if you were at, KubeCon in November in Chicago, or if you're headed to KubeCon this spring in Paris, the big cloud native CNCF, uh kind of their main convention that they have for their projects and members is IDPs, internal developer portals or platform engineering. Like it, I did some analysis. So like this is like a sneak peek, depending on where you hear the webinar, or it's already out for journalists. That I reviewed the number of talks per session, and the most talked about session, like in terms of tracks, and for Paris that's upcoming or already occurred, depending where you when you see the webinar, is platform engineering, which is just, hey, how do we disseminate this type of information? How do we glue all the decisions that we have together in a kind of a guardrail type of fashion, in a prescriptive and like a menu type of fashion? And
Can you
that's where
describe platform engineering really quick?
yeah, so there's like many names to it, right? There's like DevOps engineer, platform engineer. Like a platform engineer, they're hyper focused on the delivery pipeline and the infrastructure that supports the application. It's like there's a blur. There's all these pundits. DevOps is dead. Long live platform engineering. To me, like a platform engineer is helping like their
People
platform
say
engineer.
that DevOps is dead. Long live platform
Yeah.
engineering.
Yeah. Twitter or X, as the kids call it these days, it's ablaze with DevOps is dead. Yeah.
What happened to SRE? I thought SRE was the new DevOps. Or
They they dare not challenge the SREs. You know, the most senior engineers are usually like the SREs, right? Like there's a lot of experience. But
you know what's funny though is like the purists, including me at one point, used to argue that hey, DevOps as a term was a philosophy, was a theory. SRE is the application of that theory. So it's a misnomer when you put DevOps in your job title. You're either an SRE or you're not.
it's a
That was
cultural
like the purest argument. But then DevOps engineer just took off as a job title.
yeah, it's like people got paid more when they have DevOps in the title. Now it's like a catch-all. It's like unfair to the it's like a definitely like a movement. So going back to what a platform engineer, like they're the folks who create experiences for other experiences. So like like
What do
a
you mean?
platform engineering team would like they would and again like none of this is like a hard line in the sound. Like, hey, platform engineering team would make sure that it's a very positive experience for a user, like their internal customers, which are typically developers or other engineers, can deploy to Kubernetes and they can scale the Kubernetes workloads. Like available capacity is there, or you know what, we need to have some sort of security posture so it'll help like implement basic security tools, right? On behalf of
So they're the governance team in a distributed environment.
yeah, they're creating like the book, right? Like how to use it or the mechanism. I'm sure there's like other definitions to it depending on what how pure or not pure you are. But that's been pretty popular, right? Like this IDP, like internal developer portal craze. It started with if you look way back to this past, platforms as a service, PaaSes had these like catalogs and you could pick things and like, display information in a certain way. IDPs are they're focusing on like information dissemination, like what PaaSes had. And Spotify made it popular again because going back to their tribe and guild model, like people rotate teams every 3 to 6 months. If you've ever been a software engineer or even a quality engineer, like, it takes you, like, 3 months to become effective or more. Like, it just takes a lot of time. So if you kept rotating in and out of teams, a lot of the early decisions like, where in source control is this? Or what do I have to execute? Or, like, where do I get credentials to connect to things? Like, that takes, like, weeks to get through. Backstage is the Spotify project that they donated to the CNCF. The class of product Backstage is, it's called an IDP, Internal Developer Portal. It's information sharing, right? It's, hey, from a quality perspective, hey, we ran X number of tests. Like we want to report with some sort of cactus report. Hey, like these are per your service that you're writing. Like Omid is the service owner for the division service and the calculator. How do you get access to test reports? Where are they? Who's the owner? How are some secrets? Like when was the last time it got deployed? Where is it deployed? Like all these like internal things you got to keep in like a wiki. And IDP can help you keep like in a very consolidated format, can keep help you keep up to date with that. So you can see a big book, easy to read, easy to see. There's a lot of automation there. Like all the prudent information the QA or developer would need to be in IDP.
Is it a mythology framework or is it an actual tool?
It's an actual tool. Backstage is a tool
Got it.
by Spotify. Then IDP is like the class of tool. There's a couple of them that are springing up because I equate it to like Jira. Like it's people wouldn't go and build their own Jira, right? It's just, oh yeah, we get it. We need a ticketing system or a way to keep track of like work, right? Like I'm very pleasantly like not surprised. Okay, it was a pleasant experience. Yeah, no, I haven't talked to anybody who just like, hates an IDP. They're like, oh yeah, we get it. We need to be better at sharing information. So IDP is like Backstage is like just super popular. I was at Backstage Con or in the
Backstage con?
yeah, they have their own con
No
now.
way.
Yeah, yeah, it's really picking off. Like it's a day zero. If you're anybody here familiar with like KubeCon or Cloud Native Con, like they have these day zero events and like Backstage Con was pretty popular like this year. Like it wasn't even 2 years ago, it wasn't even when there was no con dedicated to it, but now there's like a dedicated day zero con. And it's gonna be in Paris also.
You need who are the attendees? Platform engineers, probably.
A lot of people like just I know like one a little more long-winded answer, like the cons that like KubeCon had, you used to have to buy one, right? Like back in say right before the pandemic, like you would be dedicated to go if you bought a ticket to ArgoCon or SpinnakerCon or whatever con there was, like you paid one price and you were stuck there. Now, like how the day zero stuff works, it's like you pay one like, it's a higher price ticket, but, like, you get access to everything, so that's what I noticed when I was at Backstage Con. Yeah, most of I would say, like, more than half the attendees were platform engineers, but other than half were, like, folks just curious about it, so maybe they'll have a quality con one of these days or have a Sapiens Con one of these days. Yeah, we
Okay, so coming back full circle, if I'm a QA engineer, how would you sum it up? Like, what's your like 1 minute like pitch to this person? Imagine you're talking to an IT operator like 10 years ago. What
yeah,
would you tell them? If you're a QA engineer today, what would Robbie Lockman say to them?
just embrace iteration. I remember, like, change like, it goes back to anything, like, is changing a test case bad? Is it? Is it written in stone? Is even on the operation side, is like a service level objective and SLO, you can renegotiate those things. Like the most seasoned SREs will tell you, yes, something they would do is like renegotiate, but that's due to iteration, right? Like they get feedback, they do a baseline, they look at the signals, and then they iterate, right? So embrace it. If I was speaking to an I like a system admin, the main difference between a sysadmin in like the 2010s and now, who would typically be called like a DevOps engineer, is that they need to iterate it because infrastructure is all software based. Software is trial and error, right? You're not like you misplugged a server and it like you put too many amps to it and it blew up. Oh, you just maybe need to redefine in your cloud formation template. You want another Linux instance with more hard drive space. Like, you just reconfigure it and let it recycle in and out, right? There's no racking and stacking there. And so, same thing for a quality engineer. Hey, you know what? If you're just statically executing the test and not understanding what you're executing or why you're executing or like how you're at it, like test suites are always getting bigger and bigger, right? There's like, it's a big ball of mud. I don't want to touch what was written the first year. I wasn't here. Like, I'm here like today, like it's year 2 of the project. I'm only going to start being additive. Hey, question it, right? Treat it as something that's fluid. Like the software is fluid. You can iterate it. Don't be afraid to change your perception or change like what you're testing or how you're testing it.
Same question, but for the software engineer.
The same question is like also the odd thing if I tell a software engineer is like, hey, don't be afraid of things that you can't change. Right? That's the complete opposite. Usually engineers are like, we'll change it. Like software engineers will change everything all the time. Just constant, like natural optimizers always want to change things. At some point, okay, like understand this is more generic. You understand like there some things will just need to be static, right? You just can't because change takes time.
Very
Every
stoic way of thinking. Be
yeah,
at peace with things that you cannot change.
yeah, yeah. Like I was super angsty. Like I look back at like how I used to be. It's like I just hide stuff, hide the logs. Or, oh, I just suppress that. They're never gonna find it. I don't do that anymore. I was in like in paged out, and I was very purposeful. My old employers here, this he knew you were doing that. Yeah, so it's yeah, it's like it's not be at peace, but also hey, things take time. If you had to go and redeploy something that was like on like bare like on like virtual servers or something, it takes time. You have to like reprovision, execute this CloudFormation template or Azure template again, and it's not instant, but be learning more about, like, where or how things are being like, where your software is being run or why it's being run or just, like, embracing the quality, like, it's yeah, at some point, your role will include the quality piece of it. If it's not today, if you're a pure software developer, like, very few of those roles, like, exist. Like, net new roles will exist. Like, they all have quality components to them, or there's, like, extreme ownership type of components to it now that, like, that will leave as time
What are your
progresses.
thoughts on generative AI? How is that impacting the topic shift left?
Yeah, you can ask like Gen AI like a lot of things, right? So like the chat GPTs or LLMs of the world. For example, let's say like you have no experience in something. Like you can ask it like, hey, can you write me like a JUnit test case that checks if I divide two numbers correctly? Oh, JUnit's in Java. Like, hey, can you write me a Go test that makes sure that two numbers are not divisible by zero? How would you test that? And it would spit out like a like something similar. We use some of that in our actually
Or
product.
you can use Sapient, which will do it for you automatically.
Oh yeah, you can do that too. See, good plug. I wasn't aware. of. See, you can do that. So yeah. You use Sapien to do that, for you. Um, yeah,
Well, so not just I wasn't asking the question to plug CPN, although of course I will always plug it at any opportunity.
good plug.
I was asking the question because I was wondering, not ChatGPT. I'm talking about like the Code Whisperer or like the GitHub Copilot,
Yeah.
or the Source Graph Codies of the world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that'll help you, like, that those things are, like, there, like, when you're, like, at inception time, right? And so as you're, like, hammering out, "Oh, I need to add this, like, division function in calculator.com," those things are gonna prompt you. Like, they're like the senior engineer next to you. If you're not able to have a pure program I see a cost drop, but like, let's say, like, let's say I didn't have a cost, right? Who was next to me? Like, those things could help, like, a lot. Like, those tools are really good for as you're learning, right? Oh, I need to make sure I have code coverage here. It's like the Copilot, like, hyper focusing on Copilot, right? Like, that's what it's good for, right? Like, it's added a second pair of eyes to what you're writing at the time when it's most fresh in your head as you're writing it, right? It doesn't get fresher than that. Maybe if you fell asleep and, like, dreamt about it, but that's you need to get your rest if that's the case. If that's the case.
Robbie, I can't thank you enough. Honestly, I could probably pick your brain for 4 more hours, but we're getting close. Actually, I think we're already past time, but I do want to give a chance for anybody in the audience. If they have any questions, feel free to jump in. You can ask the question in the chat if you're being shy, or you can just unmute your mic and jump into the conversation. Um, Robbie, any questions for me?
No, this is good. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. Always great chat and enjoyed the topic. Hey, like it's always a little bit nebulous as roles are shifting, or it's interesting to chat through the human element of it.
Dude, honestly, I can't thank you enough. I definitely learned a lot. You're a wealth of knowledge. And I think that your exposure, not just by your own personal interest, but also you working in harness, you probably chat with some of the largest deployments in the world, right? So you get exposed to some of the bleeding edge, I mean, not just tools like Backstage, but also techniques
No,
and mythologies. So thank you for coming on today and sharing all that.
sure, happy to.
Alrighty. Awesome. Thank you everyone for joining. I appreciate your time as well. Your eyes and your ears. Thank you again so much to Robbie Lockman from Harness.io. Have an awesome rest of your day, everybody.